politics is too important to be left to the politicians. The social movements, the people putting politicians on the spot, they're our best hope.
Welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. We're being broadcast from our new site at Edinburgh College of Art, where we are being hosted by the University of Edinburgh in a new long-term partnership. I'm Catherine Salmond, editor of Scotland on Sunday. We're joined today by Ece Temelkuran, the award-winning Turkish novelist, political commentator, and author of, together, 10 Choices for a Better Now. And we're joined by Ed Miliband, former leader of the Labour Party, former Climate Change Secretary and MP for Doncaster North. He is also author of Go Big, How to Fix Our World. So this year's online programme is a pay what you can. So if you are watching at home and are enjoying the event, we'd love you to consider paying for your ticket or making a donation to the Edinburgh International Book Festival so they can continue their great work of putting on events for so many people as possible. And thank you to everyone who's already paid for a ticket so far. I also need to add that this event is sponsored, so thank you to the Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust for that. So we're just going to start hearing from Ece first. Tell everybody a little bit about your book.
Hello, Catherine. It's nice to be here, at least seeing Scotland from afar. Together, 10 Choices for a Better Now. I wanted to offer a contract, or rather treaties, for the new progressive movements in the world. We're living in a world where the facts do not convince people, where the projects are not, activating the masses. So I wanted to speak about politics of emotions a bit, because we've seen lately all around the world that right-wing populism, authoritarianism have been working a lot with emotions. And I thought progressives should say something about that too. So I chose 10 big words. That's why 10 chapters and 10 choices, such as dignity, faith in humankind, love, strength, power, and so on. And I wanted to write, as Ed said earlier, a soulful book for the progressives of the world. So I am hoping that these words will become the central issues of progressive movements, not to organize around them only, but also to attract the masses, bigger masses. So this is what Together is about.
Thank you. And Ed, in Cornwall, can you tell us about your book as well, please?
Thanks, Catherine, and it's great to be with you and Ece, and I strongly recommend Ece's book. I've had a chance to read it before this event. It is a deeply soulful and moving book. Look, what my book tries to do is to make an argument, which is that when you look at the problems that we face in the UK, and indeed the problems the world faces, we should be drawn to big change, hence the title Go Big, not small incremental change. When you look at the inequality we face, when you look at the climate crisis, nobody can look at these problems and think, okay, small tinkering around the edges is going to be the answer. Yeah. Then to say, actually, if we lift our eyes from the way that party politics often works in the UK and look around the world in particular, you can see that whether it's housing or inequality or climate, there are big solutions out there, and we can learn from those solutions, whether it's social housing in Austria or parental leave in the Nordic countries, or what Spain is doing to have a just transition, or citizens' assemblies even in Mongolia, as a way of having different democratic approaches. That there are great ideas out there. And then sort of thirdly and finally, really to say, and this is where I think the biggest overlap is between my book and Ece's book, is that people can be part of that change. And if you look around the world, there are also incredibly inspiring movements which should give us hope for the future, whether it's the divestment movement or the fight for a $15 minimum wage in the US, 200 fast food workers that has now ended with, so far, 22 million workers now getting a $15 minimum wage. And I know Ece says in her book, choose faith over hope. So in a sense, that is about, but faith in people and people's ability to be part of that change. And you know, hopefully my book is also an invitation to people to be part of the change that they want to see.
Thank you. So we're going to format today with some questions from the audience at the end and an interview in between. We've just been laughing before we started about poor Ed, who is going to have to say hello to my friend, and we're trying to embarrass him, look at him, who told me today, another journalist, that she couldn't possibly come and speak to Ed Miliband because she fancied him too much. So he's going to say hello to her. Just, you know, she's called Claire, if you could, Ed.
Claire, hello. I'm convinced, Catherine, this is either you've made this up, or it's a case of mistaken identity.
No, I haven't. But as
I'm a little bit offended. I'm like, you could have found a fan of mine as well.
I'm sure I will. I'll find one. I'll let you know. Anyway, so we'll move on. So we're going to start talking about the COVID pandemic. And there's no doubt that the pandemic has changed many things over the world for many people. Ed, you describe this in your book. You say that the coronavirus crisis has starkly exposed the deep inequalities and injustices in our country. And from this, you both talk about people coming together during the last 18 months for so many reasons. Ece, I love your observation. It totally resonated with me when you said that, let it be recorded that as of 2020, behind every great woman is a female group chat. Absolutely love that. So, taking the pandemic, for both of you, you can argue who goes first. Just how important do you think the pandemic will prove to be in accelerating the desire to fix our world, as you say, Ed, or to make a better now, Ece? We'll go, who wants to go first?
Ed, please go first.
Ed.
Okay. I think it's in the balance, actually. I think in a way, I think this is what's really interesting, is that, look, the way I think about the pandemic is it's been a most grim and awful time right across the world. But if I think about here in the UK, it starkly exposed the deep inequalities in our country. You know, that whether it's the pay of key workers, what's happening to our public services, the resilience, the investment in our public services, who has power to work from home, who doesn't, all of those issues, and I suppose, and at the same time, so that's in a way, it's kind of I say in the book, the tide has gone out, and it's exposed some of the real problems in the way our country is run, and at the same time, it's also shown the best of us. It's in Ece's book too, as you say, about the way people have come together, and the question is, can we apply who we really are, our sort of the best of us, to the way our countries should be run? And I think it's to be fought for, to be honest. I think if I think about the UK, I don't want to be too parochial in this, but I think if I think about the UK, I think, you know, we will have had the pre-pandemic period, during the pandemic period, and then as we emerge, we don't quite know exactly what emerging looks like. As we emerge, the question is, do we do what happened after 1945 in Britain, which is to say we're going to learn the lessons. In that case, it was we're never going to go back to the 30s. And it's not, you can't exactly compare the experience of the pandemic with the war, but just to make the analogy, are we going to say, you know, we're going to learn the lessons, or are we going to go back to business as usual? And I genuinely think that is to be fought for, because I think there's a sort of paradox here, which is I think we all want to go back to normality in many ways. You know, we all want to see our family, friends, and go back to the way things were in a sense. But at the same time, I think there's a deep instinct that people have, and you see this, for example, in relation to climate, which I know you also want to talk about, that people have a sense that, okay, but, you know, this should teach us something about the way we run our countries and how we respond, how we prepare, you know. So I think it's to be fought over and to be fought for. Yeah.
Well, I totally agree with Ed, obviously, but then there's a problem with this crisis. You know, how many documentaries are there about Spanish flu, although it killed almost the same number of people as World War II did? It was none almost until this pandemic happened, and then they put together very quickly the Spanish flu documentaries. As a big fan of Second World documentaries, like very old British men, I can tell that there are loads of them. I think the crisis, like Spanish flu or COVID, they lack the drama, because these crises do not easily make us look like heroes or betrayals. The drama is lacking in this crisis, so that we won't. It is very probable that we might be forgetting about COVID in a few years, because we want to forget, and this is how humanity survives. It forgets. But on the other hand, obviously, it made all the inequalities more and more visible. But I think, especially for the Western countries, it did something very interesting. For the first time, probably since a very long while, the Western citizens, citizens of Western countries, understood how it felt to be completely superfluous. And they all understood that not every one of them is necessary for the system. And for Western countries, again, it showed how bloodless their leaders can be, how shameless. I remember Boris Johnson saying, "I don't care about the dying people unless the body is piled up." I think this was a shock for British society. It must be a shock for them, because it was openly told to them that we don't care about you because you are not crucial to the economy, to say the least. So in that sense, I think COVID created a global understanding of the system we are living in. So because the superfluousness, we all know, coming from South, I can say that, like coming from Turkey, from Afghanistan, or people would know very well what feeling superfluous mean in Afghanistan, for instance, especially today. But the British people, the French and the others, they didn't really know how it really felt. So as an addition to learning very recently how it feels to be ashamed by being representative of the worst of you, like Boris Johnson or several other leaders at the moment, Trump and so on, they now also learned how it feels to be living in the South a little bit. They had a preview of it. So will we learn from it? Will we be better? Not unless we push it towards that. But as I told in Together, and Ed repeated that as well, thank you, Ed, it showed the best of us. Because Black Lives Matter happened during pandemic, Hong Kong happened during pandemic, refugee crisis happened, and people tried to help refugees during pandemic. So yeah, this is the best of us, which only comes out in crises, unfortunately. Yeah. But I think, and Ed's book tells a lot about that, local communities and mutual aid and so on. We can start thinking about how we institutionalize that and how we make this understanding of life and this relation between human beings in times of crisis, how we can turn it to institutional, permanent aspect of our system. So there were many lessons in it, but then obviously it's a matter of politics who is going to draw which lessons, and which lessons will be there to be the new rules of our life. And we have to push it to make it clear that we want the best of ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to move on to the environment. Again, it's another theme in both of your books. Ed, particularly, you're very strong on this from the very beginning, that the need for a new social contract in the United Kingdom needs to put climate issues at its centre. So Scotland, Glasgow, will host COP26 at the beginning of November. So I'm going to ask you both how optimistic you are for that and what you would like to see come out of it. Again, I don't know who wants to go first.
Ed, do you want to start?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Well, optimism or pessimism, these are, these things, we have to pigeonhole ourselves in these things. But I think, and probably Ed would agree, we're trying to tell the whole story, the real story, and we're trying to make that story better. So it will be, I think, a big disappointment for the young people, because it all comes, Ed tells about this in his book, brilliantly. It boils down to this very technical agreement between nations, and it will happen, talking about a thing that will happen in 2050 or 30 or something. Yeah. But then I think the young people want more. They want a, overall transformation of life. Our consumer behaviors, our production behaviors, even more important, and they want this life to be completely changed. So yeah, I think they will be disappointed. And Ed tells about this organizer about the climate change and how she ended up actually being among the Extinction Rebellion people protesting against, because she was herself disappointed. So I was listening Jonathan Franzen the other day with Matthew Taylor, and he was saying something interesting. Maybe we shouldn't be hopeful, maybe we shouldn't be optimists, and maybe we should tell that it is over, there's nothing we can do. Maybe that might, activate people. I don't know, I'm not sure. But obviously we need an overall transformation of the life we are living, and that will take a lot of fight. Yeah. Actual fight. Actually, okay, let's be honest about this. There's big capital who's producing stuff, plastic and so on, and unfortunately it takes much more than young kids struggling against that. But Ed tells it as well in his book, and I totally agree. They change the discourse, they change the narrative, they transform the conversation, obviously, and we have to follow them and we have to support them as much as we can.
What do you think, Ed? Are you optimistic for COP26?
It's so hard. I really agree with Ed on this, because it is so hard to sort of, because look, at one level, I was at the rather disastrous Copenhagen summit, or seen as disastrous, about a decade ago, and I talk about this in my book. And compared to Copenhagen, the world has definitely moved on in a positive way in terms of recognizing the scale of the threat, political will, the US, China, elsewhere. I wrote recently that it's not the climate deniers that are now a problem, it's the climate delayers. And that reflects progress in a way, because, it's a shrinking minority who say there isn't a problem. So that's the sort of optimism. The pessimism, I'm afraid, is that we are in a terrible race against time. And I think this is why the climate issue does sort of stand a bit alone, because, the decisions we make in the next 10 years and the actions that countries take in the next 10 years will have ramifications for generations to come. Because otherwise, if we carry on, people talk about, what is Glasgow about? Because in a way, there's a lot of sort of mud about what actually Glasgow is about. It is about saying, in 2015 in Paris, the world said we want to try and keep global warming to 1.5 degrees. But the pledges of the world, of individual countries, amount to something like, at Glasgow, something approaching 3 degrees. So Glasgow is about closing the gap between the high-level ambition and the bottom-up pledges of countries. Now, we're very unlikely to get to 1.5 degrees at Glasgow. But so in a sense, that's rather pessimistic, because we're in this terrible race against time this decade. That said, to sort of end on a note of optimism, Glasgow is really, really important because it gives us a chance to put world leaders under pressure. People might say, what is the point of these conferences? People fly in, is it a big talking shop? It isn't just a talking shop. It is a chance to really put leaders under pressure. Whether it's Boris Johnson or Joe Biden or Xi Jinping, it's saying, we're going to put the spotlight on you to say, what are you doing? What action are you actually taking? And so we may not get all the way. We probably won't get all the way. In fact, almost certainly we won't get all the way to 1.5 degrees in Glasgow. But what is Glasgow about? It's about keeping the prospect of 1.5 degrees alive. And that requires big, big progress. And, I'd say two final things on this about what really matters in the next couple of months. One, does the developed world deliver on the promise it made more than a decade ago at Copenhagen for at least $100 billion of finance for the developing world to tackle the problems, both to adapt to climate change and to reduce their emissions, and it's got to go beyond that, in my view. And secondly, what do the big emitters do, including China? And that so there's lots of things that we could be doing, moving beyond fossil fuels, all of those things, but they're two things that really matter. So again, I think it's somewhat in the balance. I think you can look at it both ways, but you've got to push as hard as you possibly can, because this is a forcing mechanism, and it does really matter.
Yeah, I mean, like, if I may add to that,
yeah.
In everything, including climate change, there is this crack in the system, and it depends on us, actually, in which direction that crack will go on cracking. So we shouldn't be, feeling inconsequential. But then you as well mentioned that, Ed, in your book. Since 2003, since the big demonstrations, global demonstrations against Iraqi invasion, I think since then people feel like we don't count anymore. I'm like, they're not. Whatever we say, whatever we do, even if we go out on the streets as a globe, it doesn't change the decisions of the decision makers. As I was one of the spokespersons of No to War coalition in Turkey, and that Turkey was the only country actually who didn't, join the invasion. But I know how the rest of the world felt, how the British felt. So why did we what is democracy now? I think our understanding of democracy changed on that point. That was a milestone, but. I am not a pessimist or an optimist, but definitely not a pessimist. But I just want the young people to understand the scale of the fight they're getting into. It is not, let's use less plastic, let us do this, diminishing it to consumer behavior. But they're going to fight the big powers of the world. And I'm not sure everybody's, on the same page about this. So I really wish, and I am going to do whatever I can to do that. I really wish that the leaders of the world will hear the voices coming from Glasgow. But I think it will require much, much more than that.
The thing I take partly out of your book, Jen, and I reflect a bit on it in my book, is, look, you're right, for example, about the Iraq war in terms of how many million people turned out in the UK, and it didn't change the decision. Mm-hmm. But that said, it feels like the world and politics, there are, you put it much better than me, cracks in the system. There are spaces. I mean, when you talk about Black Lives Matter or the pupil climate strikers, or some of these different movements, the divestment movement, I mean, it is having an impact on some of these fossil fuel companies. And in a sense, maybe what we confuse is sort of, absolute success all the time with at least, moving things.
Yeah, that's why I don't like the word hope, because if people are looking for hope, you have to convince them that there is a hope. Whereas if you have faith, it doesn't matter if there is hope or not. You are believing in this, and then you're doing it because of your faith. And I mean secular faith here. So maybe hope is too fragile a word for these times. We need to have faith, and faith comes from sort of togetherness, which you are also talking about in the last sentence of your book, which was amazing to see.
You see, I don't want to hijack this at all, Catherine, but look, it's interesting for me because I, as people know, lost a general election. I was the leader of the Labour Party and lost a general election, and in a way, look, I look around at some of the people who are in politics with me, and most of them have gone, or if I think about some of the UK politicians, George Osborne, David Cameron, Nick Clegg, they've all gone. But in a sense, I think maybe, and I'd obviously much rather won the election, but in a sense, and I'd be interested, Jen, your thought on this. You lose, but I don't want to sound cliched, or you get back up, but it doesn't mean you can't have sort of influence or...
Absolutely. Funny story. My mother bought me this big pendant, which is a phoenix. And I said, don't buy me these things because you don't know how much it hurts to burn. Coming up, standing up again, blah, blah. That is also cliche and it hurts so much. But I believe that life is about continuation and continuation only, nothing else. So you have to continue. But many young people think that there will be a victory at the end and so on. No, there won't be a victory. We are going to be like this because we are determined, because we cannot be otherwise, because we have faith in humankind and we believe that humanity should be something better than this. So I hear you, and I completely agree. We have to continue, and we have to continue for the right reason, not because we are going to win, just because we cannot be otherwise. We cannot be worse than this.
I mean, it's very interesting. So one of my most formative experiences, which I didn't talk about in the book really, was that when I was 12, I met Ruth First, who is a South African activist. She's married to Joe Slovo, who's the General Secretary of the South African Communist Party. And she had been a student of my father's, he'd been a professor. And a few months later, she was killed by a letter bomb from the South African police in Mozambique. And, the reason I mentioned Joe is because they couldn't get to Joe because he had like bodyguards and everything. And I always remember my father saying, look, the easy thing for her to have done after she died was that she could have easily got a teaching job in the UK, but she'd been a student, I think, at the LSE for his. And she could have sort of stayed in the UK and opted out. And I always thought, and I'm not in any sense comparing myself to her, God knows, but it's sort of very striking to me about what moves people to stay in the fight, if you know what I mean.
Exactly. I'm like, before beginning this, in the very end, I was planning to congratulate you, actually, from the bottom of my heart for the courage. In English, these words sound somehow cynical. I don't mean cynical. This is like, it takes a lot of guts to do this, so especially in this age of cynicism and sarcasm and nihilism. So really, I mean, thank you for writing the book. Sorry, Catherine, I think we hijacked a little.
Well, no, I don't. And look, I'm not looking for, in any sense, thanks, because it's like, I have a much easier life than a lot of people who do much more difficult jobs. I think it's more... Yeah, I think because was very struck, Ece, we said before we came on air that you have this first chapter which really spoke to me, which is choose faith over hope. Mm-hmm. And I caught myself when I said hope earlier on. And your faith is interesting, but it's not a sort of religious faith. Like
no. It is totally secular.
The religious faith. It's a sort of faith in people.
Yeah, I do believe that we invented God because we need to have faith. It wasn't the way around. And the progressive politics should not be dismissing this fact that people need to believe. It doesn't have to be religious, and I'm a secular person. I'm not religious. I don't believe, but I believe in humankind. And it is a choice. It is not, I didn't evaluate the humankind looking at the history of humans and decided to believe in them. It is the ethical and political choice, despite all the radical evil residing in them. So it is an ethical choice, and we have to, I feel like we have to speak about this, because in 1970s it wasn't a problem, because they weren't living in an age of cynicists and people who are contaminated by sarcasm and so on. When they spoke about love, human love, nobody mocked them. Now it is almost impossible to speak about faith in humankind and love and not to be smirked at. And I think all our ears, even if we are progressives, all our ears are sort of contaminated by the neoliberal understanding of human, which is not a very good understanding of human, which is like a diminished version of human. I think we're all contaminated, and I feel like we have to fight against that on the moral, philosophical, and political level.
You see, I think there's one other thing I would add to this, which is this is also about the way you design your institutions. And this is, I just need to sort of explain this. You see, I have this chapter on the universal basic income,
exactly.
which is this idea of the universal so for those who don't know, it's like replacing some parts of the means testing of the welfare state with a flat rate payment every day. I think they may be trialling it. Some parts of Scotland may be trialling it or thinking about piloting it. Wales is talking about a pilot of it, and Finland and so on. And I think that's so interesting about UBI. UBI is both my favourite policy in the book and also the one I think is least likely to happen in the short term. But actually, what's so interesting about UBI is it's sort of a gamble on human nature in saying, look, we basically believe people are good, and if you give people a platform, they'll do great things with it. Because UBI says we're not going to inquire into whether you're, striving for work. It's kind of, you have a foundation.
But don't you think it is a striking conflict that I'm a lawyer, by the way, by education. Don't you think that all the, legal systems that we are living in today stand upon this faith in humankind, whereas our economies do not?
That's interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting because you cannot operate in a society without a legal system thinking that people in essence are good. You have to assume that. And on that assumption rises the entire legal system.
My wife, who is a lawyer, has never said that to me about the law. Why does the law assume that?
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you both there.
Say hi to her.
I'm going to stop you, Ed, and we're going to move on to a topic that I know that you will absolutely love.
Sorry.
Scottish independence. So there's going to be a lot of people watching this today, and that their idea of the better now or how to fix their world is separation from the rest of the UK. So I'm going to ask Ed this first. Can you understand why so many Scots feel like that at the moment? And
Yes.
How do you see the Scottish independence debate panning out?
Sure. I mean, let me say why I said yes to the question. I think sort of yes in one or two different respects.
Okay.
Look, first of all, some of it, I'm not saying all of it, some of the independence movement is founded on looking at the Tories in Westminster and saying, look, we don't want to be part of them. If you think about Boris Johnson, he isn't a great advert for the United Kingdom in terms of, certainly not in Scottish eyes, lots of people in Scotland. Now, I don't want the Tories running the UK either. Secondly, if I can make a sort of a bit of an analogy to my own constituency in Doncaster, I represent a constituency, Doncaster North. Doncaster North was one of the heaviest voting Brexit constituencies, Labour constituencies that voted for Brexit. Now, I didn't agree with that. That wasn't my position. But I totally understand why people did it. And because they told me, they said, look, we want big change. We don't think the country's being run for us. And we want something different. We want something better. I say in the book, lots of people think that Brexit was about immigration or the EU. Actually, for many more of my constituents saying, I want a new beginning, I want something different. Now, that's not my position on Scottish independence, obviously. My answer is, yes, we do need big change, but we will be more likely to achieve that change if we do it together. Think about the issue of the climate issue. I think we can do that better together. Think about the deep economic and social inequalities that we face. We can do that better together. Now, obviously that's my position. I don't know how it will pan out, but that's sort of what I strongly feel. But I totally understand why people will feel that, because they, in a sense, I wrote the book because I look at the way our country is run. And by the way, centralisation is part of it too, centralisation at Westminster. And I think we need big change in relation to the country, but there's just a disagreement about how that change is achieved and whether independence would take us towards it or further away from it.
What do you think, Edgy? I know that you winced when I said we're going to talk about Scottish independence, but the idea of a country wanting to rule itself, how do you view that?
Well, having written a book called Together, I cannot oppose the idea of togetherness. But then we have to formulate what kind of togetherness we are talking here. There's a bit in the book about friendship, and I tried to discuss friendship in political terms, and I gave an example of Kurdish question.
Yeah.
Although Scottish question is completely different than Kurdish question, there is this similarity trying to be. Okay, let's not finish that sentence. I think we can apply this idea of friendship rather than brotherhood in politics. I don't know if we can apply it on international level. It takes a lot of work, obviously. But friendship might be a guiding idea when we are talking about independence. And that's all I can say, because otherwise I'm going to be the bull in a china shop, I know, because it's a very, very particular, complicated...
It's okay. Ed enjoys chatting about it, so that's okay. So the next question that I want to ask you about is how you hope your books will be regarded in 10 years from now. We'll go with...
Okay, you better answer this.
Well,
obviously, you'll have made millions from them, so apart from that.
You wish. I have a habit of writing books earlier than I should. How to Lose a Country was like that. It took 2 years for especially British and American people to get the idea that I am talking about their problems as well. So I think in 10 years, I'm hoping that people might be willing to gather around these concepts in this age of extreme polarization, because we need these words that are close to human heart to politicize people for a better world and for a better humanity. So I wrote the book for those people, and especially young people, actually, who do not know the political discourse as much as our generation, because I grew up in between two piles of books, socialist books, and the deconstruction of that socialist narrative. And the young people, let's say Greta's generation, they do not know about this unless they are, studying political science or something. And I am not sure they want to either. Maybe more central concepts such as human dignity or dignity of nature or faith in humankind might be more mobilizing for them to change the world. Yeah. So that is what I'm hoping, and yeah, I think it will come true.
It's quite inspiring. What about you, Ed? How would you like your books to be regarded in 10 years from now?
Still in print, maybe.
Paperback.
Yeah, or something. I don't know, it's a really good question. I mean, somebody, this is the first book I've written, and somebody I talked to about this in advance said, look, you just got to set yourself low expectations and think if 10 people read it and it had a sort of positive influence on them, then count it as a success. And I sort of think setting a low bar is quite sensible. I don't know, in a way, I think having read Ece's book and my book, and thinking about my book, we're trying to write, I think, both of us, in a sense about the current moment and in a sense about the future. And I think it's about contributing. I think what's more important is contributing to a debate now about where do our countries go, because I think what's so interesting, I came into politics as an advisor in the 1990s, and you felt then that the parameters were quite narrow as to where Britain could go. I feel like the parameters are incredibly wide now. Yeah. I mean, the world, I said this towards the end of the book, the world could be it already is incredibly scary, but could get scarier. Or we could search for something, we could get something better. We could deliver something quite significantly better. And in a sense, I think that's what draws me to politics. That's what's kept me engaged in politics, is that I think that there is, despite all the problems, there is possibility. So in a way, I think for me, the books are sort of contribution to debate now, and goodness knows where we will be in 10 years' time.
But can I say something about Ed's book in 10 years? You have a prediction, or hope, probably, I don't know which one, about local communities and local politics. I've written something about that in Financial Times. I predict that these big metropolitan cities will be running the world politics very soon, like in 10 years probably. So I think they will go back to your book and say, yep, this happened in the last 10 years.
Well, it's nice to be saying. I mean, I just make one very ironic British parochial point, which is it's hard to read what happens in 10 years. About 10 years ago, a bit less than 10 years ago, I was saying that we should intervene in the energy market in the UK and freeze energy prices. And David Cameron famously said he's living in a Marxist universe, and it's now the UK government's policy. And so, in a way, the world sort of, the world changes in very unpredictable ways. And particularly the last 6 years since I stopped being leader has been so unpredictable. Who knows, really? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's go back to young people, which, Ece, you've been going on, back to this. It's such an important part of both of your books, the strength of young people's voices, their dissatisfaction. Ed, you question in part of your book, how are we going to start hearing the voices of young people more clearly in our politics? Ece, you talk specifically about Greta Thunberg and her spotless, righteous faith and her truth in people. You say that her attention rises above today's noisy carnival of emotions. I want to ask you both how excited you are about people like her, the passion of today's younger people, and how that may actually be the driver for the genuine change that we need.
Ed, would you like to go first?
I just think that it's our best hope. But I think we all have a task, which is to think like a young person. Try to think like a young person. And you might say, well, would that always be true? Maybe, but I think it's particularly at this moment, because what strikes me, like in particular about the climate crisis, actually I'd say two things about why to think like a young person. One, if you think about the climate crisis, we have a duty to hear the voice of young people because they're going to have to live with it longest, and they're the closest we get to the voice of future generations. And because climate has got this particular character, which is that we're a very particular moment, which is that we know enough for it to be impossible to deny that we are having a dramatic effect on our climate and a dramatic and negative effect, and we're not too late to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so we're at this particular juncture, and so young people are our best, actually, the psychology and the views of young people are our best guide on this. And then the second thing I'd say about young people, and this is particularly true in politics, is that they're not weighed down by baggage. Yeah. They're not weighed down by thinking, well, that was done 20 or that was tried 30 or 40 years ago, or that got a bad name or whatever. They have a freshness in their when I was a young person, I was an intern at a magazine in America called The Nation. I went back and did a talk there a few years ago, and an older person said to one of the then interns, why are young people turning to old-fashioned ideas like socialism that people like Bernie Sanders are talking about? And she said, and then this intern intervened and said, old-fashioned. She said, it's not old-fashioned. I grew up under Bill Clinton. And so I think in a way there's something about not being, the best of politics is thinking we made our institutions and we can remake them. And there is an optimism, to use that word, to young people's passion for things to be different that I think we've got to sort of learn from.
What do you think, Ece?
Absolutely. Like they are rediscovering these words, and they don't know, they haven't been imposed, they haven't been exposed to this immense neoliberal propaganda that we had to go through in 1980s and 90s. So they think that socialism is a sexy new idea, who Alexandria Octavia-Cortez talk about. So it is nice. It is amazing. So that is good. Young people, I think they feel betrayed on a global level by the entire humankind and by entire human history. And that is something that we cannot really feel, I think. Our generation was different. And also, they are constantly faced with our mourning, because we look at the sea and we already mourn about the things we're going to lose. We look at the tree and we're already mourning about the loss of forests and so on. I think they don't want this. They don't want this, you know, oh, we're losing everything, the world is becoming so ugly and so on. This is what they have, and they want to know what they can do with it, and they want to do it very, very quickly. Yeah. Coming to Greta Thunberg, what I love about her is she refused to be the poster child. And she is showing us the concept I talked about in the book. It's attention, because our communication sphere, especially social media, is full of anger expressions of anger. And this anger spree conceals what we really do in life. So I was proposing in Together to choose attention over anger, and I think Greta is the absolutely perfect example of this, because she's paying attention and she's never giving up and she's never angry, because she grew up in a world where emotions are so important. That was one of the part of the neoliberal culture, because we didn't want antagonism, so everybody started speaking I feel. The emotions became overrated and so on. And in that world, she's showing no emotion. And she's showing only attention, and she calls everyone to be in full attention. So that is something I think young people are doing despite all the noise that we are seeing in our communication sphere today.
Thank you. So I'm going to hope I can get this tablet to work, and we've got some questions, I think. Okay, so we've got a question from Fiona. Will worldwide leaders ever really buy into changing the world unless there's money to be made or power to be had? Ed.
Good question.
Ed.
You know, look, as somebody who's been in government, you face enormous pressures. I'll do my best to answer this question, but you face enormous pressures and big forces. And if you take the climate issue, for example, which maybe Fiona was getting at, you know, the fossil fuel industry, huge pressures, and in a sense, so what is going to be the answer to that? Well, one, that there'll be some politicians who want to do the right thing, but secondly, the force on the other side, the countervailing force. And that's why, and I said this in the book, you know, politics is too important to be left to the politicians. The social movements, the people putting politicians on the spot, you know, they're our best hope, as well as politicians who want to do the right thing. But I guess I don't think the answer is simply electing this politician will answer all the problems. It's all about the circumstances and the battle of power that takes place, and social movements are absolutely crucial to that.
What do you think, Edgy?
Well, I mean, like, I wrote a chapter about how I don't know about economics, so it's good that Ed knows about that. No, I mean, like, it was a political choice for almost, you know, many of us in my generation not to know about economics, because economy was to be taken care of those people who know about it. And, you know, it was suddenly it was numbers talking to numbers, and then it became so complicated that we have to learn what happened to us in 2008. We all try to understand, you know, this bubbles and blah, blah, derivatives and so on. And I wrote about that in the book. And I wrote that we have to know about economics and we have to study finance and so on in order to change it. So, yes, there is going to be that problem, always. There will be, people will ask you, how will you make money? But then I think we shouldn't be afraid of that question. We should be able to answer that question properly. And the economists on the progressive side of the politics answer it perfectly well, from Piketty to Yanis Varoufakis, and also Ed's book is a great guide to that as well for those people like me who doesn't really understand what's going on with economy. So yeah, I cannot answer the question, but I know that this is not a fearful question, and it cannot be a rhetorical question. There is an answer to this question. It's just we have to read enough books to learn that answer.
Okay, we've got another one here. Whatever route you take, whatever the big idea to get us there, how do the best of us run our countries when there is a very deep seam of populists who appear to be intransigent to changing their views about anything?
AJ, I'd like to hear your answer on this.
Yeah. Today I heard, I saw this video, Boris Johnson going to the crisis center, I think, and he was asking very carelessly, to put it mildly, about the Afghanis calling this crisis center. And then he was very, very relaxed about it. He was very casual about it. And I wrote something like, this is the age of shamelessness. And this is a global pattern among the authoritarian leaders, about the right-wing populist leaders. They turned shamelessness into a cultural and political identity. And people are defending their identity when they are being shameless, just like as their leader. And I talked about this in How to Lose a Country a lot. But if we have faith in humankind, which I do, we have to believe that we can still make them be ashamed of themselves. So this is part of the transformative effect of social pressure. Lately in Turkey there were massive wildfires. The entire southern coastline of Turkey burned, actually, and our president went there with a huge bus, and he threw packages of tea to the people, and he even joked about it. He said, "I heard that it takes away the fever, the tea." So when you are faced with this kind of shamelessness, this kind of ruthlessness, you start thinking that the humankind is bad and like we are evils, we are like unnecessary to this universe and so on. But then we have to be on the other side of the pendulum and say that no, this is not the majority, this is not the people, this is not what a human looks like and so on. It's all about power game, as Ed earlier said, and we have to be more vocal about what a human should look like.
I mean, I would agree with that. The other side of this coin, and I don't know whether this is the right answer or not, but it's sort of what I instinctively think is the rise of populism is also testimony to the failure of mainstream politics.
Exactly.
In other words, if mainstream politics answers the grievances, and I actually don't use that word pejoratively, the grievances, the discontent that people have in their lives, I think populism is much weakened. And, if I think about Trump, I always think about this advert Trump did 2 days before the 2016 election, which was all about, you've lost your jobs, the global elite have failed you, and so on. And look, some part of what he was saying was right.
Exactly.
And unless you answer that deep discontent, I sort of think explaining better why mainstream politics is really quite good is never going to get you anywhere. You've got to show how you can answer. Now, that's not going to satisfy everybody. I accept there are people who are supporters of Trump and so on who are not economically disadvantaged and all that. But I think that is part of the answer.
Yeah, I mean, like, all these books have been written, especially in the United States, about rising authoritarianism, fascism, and so on. And most of them treat this problem as a passing by, disease of democracy, whereas I do think that it is intrinsic to our current understanding of democracy, because democracy has become the theatrics of itself. It was supposed to be, because there is no social justice. When there is no social justice, of course you end up with right-wing populism, of course you end up with fascism even. But then, we cannot dismiss those feelings of people being let down. That's why I wrote the book, because yes, they do feel like that. And when you give them pride, when you promise them, we're going to mend your pride, of course they buy it, because nobody talks about dignity. Not nobody, but not enough people talks about dignity. And I think if we can be many enough, we can turn that tide towards the other way around, the right way, so to speak.
We've got 5 minutes. We've got one more question. So here we go. How are progressives going to persuade populists to take a more informed view when they have to counter three-word slogans chanted by the likes of Farage, Johnson, Trump? It's unlikely that their books will be read by this section of the population, nor will their views be listened to.
I was on stage with Nigel Farage in Denmark. And I said something.
And what happened?
You pushed him off.
Well, he didn't let me speak, and then he went to congratulate Trump, by the way, because Trump was, that inauguration day was going to happen. So I said, like, this is how it feels like to talking to a right-wing populist. They scatter all the pieces of the chess, and then they shit on the chessboard, and then they fly away proudly. So I think our first job is not to convince right-wing populists. Our first job is to convince ourselves, because I don't know what you think, Ed, but many people who write such books, who give talks about these matters, many progressives, I would say, do not really believe that we can do this. This is my observation, but they are not 100% sure that we can do this. So I think first we have to heal ourselves in that manner, in that sense. And also, right-wing populists, I mean, like, except for those who are the spin doctors of this movement, let's say, like Nigel Farage, people can be really easily convinced. It's just you have to take the time. Because, yeah, you have to take the time. Yeah, that is very important, and be attentive and kind. And I'm like, these words sound a little bit religious or something, but actually we need these words, kindness and, generous and so on.
What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of relates to what I said before. I mean, somebody once said, I think, don't love Trump, but love Trump voters. It's like, I think understanding people's pain, I think, is really important in this. I think you've got to, it's the soil in which populism grows, this nasty populism grows, is discontent. And therefore you've got to understand people's pain. I think you do also have to sort of call them out. I mean, I think that is really important. I mean, I am quite, dare I raise the question of football and the England football team in this context, but, I am quite struck by what happened with the players taking the knee and Boris Johnson refusing to condemn those who booed them. And, he basically was clearly, and then Gareth Southgate essentially shamed the England manager, sort of shamed him, really. I mean, not directly, but indirectly, by saying, look, this is the history of what, we're protesting about. This is the present of what we're protesting about. This is why I respect the players. This is why it's a patriotic thing to do. And in a way, I think that episode is really interesting for the way in which, Johnson and a kind of attempt to have a sort of political culture war by him really ended up on the wrong side of the argument. So I think I don't have a solution. If I had to have a solution, I'd probably be Prime Minister. I'd be still doing this event. But, one, understand the pain that gives populism the ability to grow and succeed, and secondly, you've got to call it out, and you've got to be strong. And I suppose this is something I've learned. In a way, strength against populism beats weak. I don't mean weakness, but sort of kowtowing to it. You do have to call it out. When it's wrong, you've got to call it out. But look, it's incredibly difficult. And I as for three-word slogans, I am not the man for three-word slogans, I'm afraid.
Listen, we're drawing to an end, so I really just want to thank you both for coming. And I know you've been admiring this beautiful backdrop, and we were pretending it was my house, but it's not. So maybe another time you'll be here in Edinburgh in person. Is there anything you want to add before I plug the fact that your books can be bought online at shop.edbookfest.co.uk?
I would say buy Ed's book.
Sorry, Ed.
Buy Ed's book, obviously. And I want to do this in Edinburgh with a lot of scotch in person, please. Definitely,
I'm up for that. I I think the three of us should have a return meeting in person.
And my friend Claire, obviously.
And your friend Claire, so the four of us.
She would really like that, definitely.
Claire, we want you to be part of this discussion too.
But she said she wouldn't be able to say 2 sentences. She wouldn't be able to speak in front of you.
Claire is dying now.
Claire will be dying inside, definitely. Well, I was going to ask, Edge, have you been to Edinburgh before? You've been to a lot of, well, hopefully another time.
Yeah.
And
was
Ed,
it Redbreast? The Scotch Redbreast, I think, right?
I'm not sure what you may have had, but
anyway,
there's lots of different varieties for you to enjoy.
See how many.
But yeah, I'm watching this clock. I don't know if the screen explodes at 20 seconds or not, or here we go.
I'm going to do a shameless plug. I will be in Edinburgh at Toppings bookstore. I think it's Friday is it the 10th of September? It's a Friday night.
Oh, brilliant.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much. I think we're going to cut off.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. It's been lovely.
It was an honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.